So we are going to start with this email. This is Bonifacio, a former classroom student of mine, and he writes, "Hey, Ben and Nathan, I have a problem with slowing down on the logical reasoning section. Sometimes I'll miss 6 or 8 on a section, and they're usually at question number 18 plus. When I'm answering them, I feel like I'm not going fast. I set a goal of only answering 18 to 20 per section." The goal of only answering 18 to 20 per section. I got a little, that makes me a little queasy. I average 16 to 18 correct, but I find myself answering at least 20 questions. Is there a mental checklist I should go through for each question to make sure I've fully comprehended the stimulus? I don't want to purposely slow down if I feel like I've already selected the correct answer, but I clearly need a strategy for developing a more accurate pace. Thanks for the advice. Congrats on the 50th episode. That was a while ago. The podcast is great. Regards, Bonifacio. Thanks for writing. Ben, you actually emailed him back, and we've got some notes here. You want to go through kind of your advice?
Yeah. So I gave him a checklist for the questions, but I do want to interject 1 second here. Reading this again, I feel like he says, I clearly need a strategy for developing a more accurate pace.
Yeah.
And I feel like he's a little too concerned about his pacing.
Yeah, I agree. When he says, I set a goal of only answering 18 to 20 per section, that's just not something that I would even be thinking about.
Yeah.
I would be thinking about answering the questions. And however many I get to, that's how many I get to.
Yep.
I would be thinking about getting them right. And it's not about achieving your goal of reaching question number 20 or not going farther than question number 20. That's not, you're wasting brain cycles thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, I think you should just be thinking about the question that's right in front of you, getting that one right.
Yeah.
And being as close as you're going to get to right before moving on.
I completely agree. And I think that because we've talked about slowing down so much, maybe that's where he's coming from, but I think he's taking it the wrong way and going too far and saying, okay, I'm not going to go over 20. Who cares how far you go? Just make sure that you're going as fast or as slow as you need to for that particular question. And that changes from question to question. I mean, one thing that I think happens to me is that I will read an argument. I will say to myself, here's the conclusion, here's the premises. This is not a perfect argument, but it seems good enough to me. And then I might read the question and it will say, which one following most accurately describes the flaw of reasoning or something like that. And I'll say, whoa, I thought this argument was okay, or not great, but not that bad. And that will force myself to go back and look at it. And I think that people don't take enough time to reevaluate arguments when they get some clue that they should. Either something is amiss, but they don't take time to sort of clarify that in their mind. Like, what exactly, I feel like something is being assumed here, but I'm not stopping to just lay that out a little more clearly in my mind. Because as soon as they do in class, then they're like, well, I guess it's assuming that everyone should do this or whatever. And you say, yeah. And they're like, oh, that's why B is correct. And you're like, yeah. You could have found this, but you let yourself just sort of go into the answer choices with a slight fog. And so whenever something is amiss, you don't want to just let it go. But if things make sense and the question's just like, well, what's the main point? And it makes sense, then just keep going. There's no need to slow down and redo things. Yeah, I don't manage my time one way or the other. I'm just not managing the time. I'm just, what I do is I answer the questions and I get them right. And sometimes that happens quickly. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. So I would never, it sounds almost like what he's saying is, he's worried that he's getting to the correct answer too quickly sometimes. Mm-hmm. Well, if you're at the correct answer, then you're at the correct answer. And that's great. And now it's time to go to the next question. Yeah. If you're not at the correct answer, then you need to just stay there as long as you think you're getting closer to the correct answer. Mm-hmm. I think you're totally right what you just said. I had a little experience last night in class where I read the stimulus and I was not pissed.
And when I'm not pissed, that usually means that there's not an argument.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that it was just fact. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But they had hidden, there was as it turns out, okay, when I got to the question stem, the question was like, which one of the following, if true, would most strongly support the conclusion above? And I was like, wait a minute. I was anticipating that this was going to be a must be true question because I didn't think I saw an argument. I thought that it was just fact. Mm-hmm. But that's the moment where I slow down. Mm-hmm. And I think that's exactly what you're saying, right? Yeah. Is that you've spotted that something is amiss. I think that the student who's going too quickly, there's going to be something wrong, but they're going to just go blunder ahead right into the answer choices without figuring out what's wrong. And someone who's better at the test, a little more disciplined maybe, is going to say, whoa, wait, there was a conclusion there? There was an argument there? Mm-hmm. Oh, shit. If there's an argument there, I better go figure out what that argument was saying.
Yeah.
And, and think about it and see if there's something missing. Because they're asking me to strengthen the argument. I didn't even see an argument. Mm-hmm. Well, you can't strengthen an argument if you didn't see the argument.
Yeah.
If you don't know what the conclusion is, if you don't know that they made a conclusion, you have no chance at strengthening the argument. So there is where, you've got to slow down and make sure you get it. Mm-hmm. And then I would just say, as long as you're getting closer to the correct answer, you should stay there and continue getting closer to the correct answer. Mm-hmm. At some point, though, you're going to have narrowed it down and you're not getting any closer anymore. And you've reread it maybe, and you still feel like, well, I know it's B or D, but I just don't know. I'm spinning my wheels.
Yeah.
Well, then you pick and you move on.
Yeah.
But that's it. I'm never thinking about how many questions I'm attempting or what the time is or anything. It's just, if I've gotten to the correct answer and I know it's the right answer, then I'm picking it and I'm moving on. If I've narrowed it down, but I can't get any closer, then I'm moving on. That's it.
No, I completely agree. One thing that he did ask for was this checklist, and I do feel like the checklist I gave him is one that I find myself repeating over and over and over in class, and that is most of these arguments, or most of these passages are arguments, and most of the questions in logical reasoning are asking us to find some problem with them, as which you've mentioned a bajillion times. Yeah. And so I say to people right off the bat, okay, where's the conclusion? Because we have to start with that. That's what we're either trying, that's where the problem presents itself. And a lot of people in class will say, well, I found the conclusion's here. There are a lot of people in class who hadn't found it yet precisely, which is a real bummer because I don't know how you can evaluate an argument if you don't know for sure what the person is trying to conclude. Mm-hmm. But for all the people who say I found the conclusion, I say, okay, great. Well, now where's the evidence? And I would say of half of those, maybe it wasn't totally clear what part of the argument was the evidence. Usually it's the rest, but there can be other things in there. And then I say, okay, well, now that we've found the evidence, even for those people who have found it, what do you think of it? Like, what can you conclude from that evidence, and how is that different from what the person actually concluded? And that's where most people say, okay, well, let me think. How far could I take this evidence legitimately, and how is that different from the conclusion? And at that point, that's when they figure out the problem. And it's like, it's just unfortunate that you didn't take the time to do that yourself. I'm just asking you the questions, and now you're doing it. So I think that would be one thing I would add to everyone's checklist is find the conclusion, find the premises, and then figure out what those premises do prove and how that's different from what the author actually concluded.